Hello, welcome to the Stroke SIG Student Corner response to questions from students. My name is Heather Hayes and I'm excited to be able to present the information to you. Just a reminder, you can look on the Stroke SIG Special Interest Group and identify any questions that you may have, and we will choose from certain questions or we will talk to you directly depending on what we're interested in to be able to answer your questions. So today I'm excited to share with you a question that somebody has posed. So the question that a student has posed to us is, how can fear of falling and post-stroke fatigue be measured objectively during gait performance? And when I think about this question, as you know, we're always going to have to delve into the specifics of these pieces a little bit more clearly. So we're talking about two components. The first is fear of falling, and the second is post-stroke fatigue. Let's make sure that we can define what those two aspects are for individuals post-stroke. For fear of falling, this is really a component that individuals will score low on if they have fall-related self-efficacy. And so we're thinking about what self-efficacy is. This refers to an individual's belief and their capacity to execute behaviors that are needed to perform specific goals. It reflects their confidence in the ability to exert their control over their motivation, their behavior, and their social environment. So really it becomes a more complex aspect to what one is experiencing when we're talking about fear of falling. The second is post-stroke fatigue. This is fatigue that's not like your usual tiredness that you and I may experience after a day of work. It's not also related to the recent activity that they did, so that they were able to overdid it and then needed to rest. And it also is something that does not go away after they've rested or have naps. So what I consider doing next, if you can understand these components, is what we really need to do is we need to measure these aspects to understand how the patient is experiencing their falls, their confidence, and their fatigue. So there's several measures that are out there. When we think of measuring efficacy, there's the Falls Efficacy Scale. This is a scale that allows you to ask the individual on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being very confident and 10 being not confident at all, how confident are you that you can do these activities without falling? And so depending on the different aspects that they're presented with, this is going to help you identify where they may be most fearful of falling and what might be the challenges. So if it's, for example, answering the door or the telephone, maybe it's a dual task. Maybe they're in a hurry. Maybe getting dressed and undressed. They're standing and having to do two things at once. So this will let you understand a little bit about the nature of the falls they're experiencing. The other is the Activities Balance Confidence Scale. This standardized measure allows you to identify how confident are you that you will not lose your balance or become unsteady when doing certain activities. And they start with simple activities like walking around your house to getting up and down on an escalator carrying a package. And this is 0% to 100% confident. Again, as you start to understand what might be the challenges that they're facing, then based on their confidence and their efficacy, then you're going to have a better understanding of where you need to intervene. The next part is that we do need to measure their fatigue. What kind of post-stroke fatigue? Is it a cognitive fatigue or a motor fatigue? And there's several scales that are out there. We have the Fatigue Severity Scale, the Modified Fatigue Impact Scale, the Fatigue Scale for Motor and Cognitive Functions. Each of these allows a different way of analyzing one's fatigue. We often think of this fatigue severity and modified fatigue impact as related for individuals with multiple sclerosis, but we can take this idea into other aspects in their day-to-day lives for individuals post-stroke. The Fatigue Scale for Motor and Cognitive Functions does seem to show a little bit different for individuals post-stroke, but I think at this point, any of these measures would help you understand their fatigue. And when we're thinking about this, the following questionnaire is about problems in everyday life which are directly associated with an extreme form of tiredness or fatigue. This extreme form of tiredness refers to an overwhelming state of lethargy, exhaustion, and lack of energy, which comes on abruptly and is unrelated to any obvious external causes like I work too much today in the garden. It does not mean the sort of isolated episodes which everyone might experience after exertion or after a sleepless night. This is a great way to be able to educate your patients on what this fatigue feels like and for them to be able to identify it. And then by using this measure, It helps you identify where their problems may be coming on. So for example, when I concentrate for a long time, I get exhausted sooner than other people of my age. So you may notice that these are related to motor as well as cognitive fatigue, and this may help you understand what they're experiencing on the day-to-day basis. So when you start to utilize these measures, the next thing you need to do is really understand what's the interpretation of them. What does that mean? Is higher better? Is higher worse? What's the reliability of the measure? And is it reliable for my patients with stroke or more for patients with multiple sclerosis? What kind of changes I might want to notice with them? And all this information can be found at the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab. And as you start to identify which measure may be correct for your patients, is it my patient who's post-stroke, my patient with MS? What age? Maybe younger populations may have different responses than older populations. And you can also start to identify, as I'm intervening, how much change would I want to observe in the population I'm assessing? What's the clinically meaningful change, or the MCID, the minimal clinically important difference, where I might recognize that I have made a change in my patient? And you can assess that for each of those measures, for confidence, for efficacy, as well as for post-stroke fatigue. And even if you don't have all of those numbers, putting that combination together will help you. And then you also have to ask yourself, what type of presentation is occurring? Is this somebody with chronic stroke versus acute stroke? And are not going to be able to make that change in the acute stroke setting while they're just healing? Or is it somebody in the chronic stroke setting? And also consider, for these individuals, we may have more issues of depression, and that may be overlying the lethargy and the motivation. So be sure you're taking a look to know that we're truly dealing with a post-stroke fatigue and how it's impacting them. Finally, what you really want to do is we need to educate, educate, educate. The more the patient understands that fatigue, falls, fear of falling, and confidence can be a natural process for somebody post-stroke. Let them know what fear of falling is, and how you may be able to help them, and where they may be noticing their fears of falls. Help them to understand what the fatigue feels like. Help them to understand how they can help manage their energy conservation and their fatigue. Feeling good one day does not mean that they go out and do a lot of activity. It seems like they should do that, but it also can be counterproductive. I'd like to be able to show a clip to you that can help you understand fatigue, that can help you better explain the fatigue to your patients of what they may be experiencing. So helping the individual understand what that fatigue may feel like, and you can also help them understand it, you're going to get a better sense of how they're monitoring throughout the day. They may want to use a diary, and you can ask them to use a diary to help you understand what's happening and what may be contributing factors for them. So the question of how can fear of falling and post-stroke fatigue be measured objectively during gait performance, I would not say that these are components that we're specifically looking at during gait performance, unless they identify, when I walk, I have a fear of falling, and because I walk, I am more fatigued. But let's consider all the other aspects. Is it fear of falling when you're on uneven surfaces? Is it fear of falling when somebody's talking to you? Is it fear of falling when I don't have my cane, when I'm walking around my house, on carpet? Is my fatigue all the time or only after I walk a mile? And so by asking those quantitative measures of your patients, even though they're subjective, you're going to get a better sense of what they may be experiencing. And while you're not objectively measuring it during gait, you're going to have a better understanding of educating them during gait of what they may be experiencing. So in summary, be sure you're measuring those aspects that you're asking about. And it's going to be subjective, and it's going to give you that broad perspective. Then you're going to understand what those measurements mean and what kind of change am I looking for, and how can I interpret and best interpret it for my patient. Finally, really educate your patients. That empowers them to understand what is happening to them after their stroke. Here's a list of additional resources that you can follow up with. There's a great handout from the stroke.org in the UK about post-stroke fatigue that really helps individuals to understand. You have your outcome measures that are all at the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, and those can be used to help you measure. Here's the references, and I appreciate your time, and if you have any other questions, please let us know at the Stroke SIG Student Corner.